In this workshop, my colleague Anne Tierney and myself, Rosemary McKilwin, from the Learning and Teaching Academy at Heriot-Watt University, will share our SoTL-informed approach that we've taken to designing our postgraduate certificate in teaching and learning. So the plan for the workshop is firstly to give you a bit of background to developing a SoTL-informed postgraduate certificate in teaching and learning, a PG Cert. Then to talk about how we've taken an evidence-informed approach to the development of it, to give you a bit more detail about our PG Cert at Heriot-Watt, and then finally to get an opportunity to explore the SoTL-informed work that you've been doing in your own context. For the purposes of this recording, the actual workshop was much more interactive, so we've just focused on sharing our experience here.
So if we look at the background to developing this PG Cert, if we go back to the history of it, the Deering Report in 1997, which coincided with the expansion of higher education in the UK, one of its recommendations was that teaching staff in higher education establishments should have a teaching qualification. So that has become more common in the last 25 years. Of course, we have our professional body, which is Advance HE. They offer fellowship at 4 different levels, so fellowship of the Higher Education Academy, and generally they accredit PG certs like ours according to the UK Professional Standards Framework, and they're accredited at fellow level. So we expect our students to be practising and also learning across the whole range of teaching, learning and assessment activities. One of the things to note in Scotland is that education was devolved in 1998, and our Quality Assurance Agency works on an enhancement approach. So you may have heard of a risk-based approach or an audit-based approach. We work on enhancement when we're talking about teaching and learning in higher education. So that's the way that we work, and all of that is bound up in our PG Cert. So more of the background to developing this PG Cert is my own experience. So I came from a university which established a teaching and scholarship career pathway in 2003. But the experience of being a teaching only academic was that we were required to do scholarship. But it was difficult for anyone to tell us what doing scholarship actually meant. And so I became interested in the scholarship of teaching and learning and how that could enhance my teaching practice, but also how it could help my students. Because of the teaching and scholarship requirement, I was a member of the faculty learning community in 2006, and we actually explored the definition of SoTL and what that actually meant. And the outcome of that was that we were empowered as teaching only academics. We understood that SoTL was really our field of research almost, and that being a SoTL informed academic was a way to improve our student learning practice. In 2010, I also took part in the Faculty Leadership Certificate Programme at the University of British Columbia. That again was a turning point in my career, where I began to understand the international nature of SoTL and was introduced to the North American and the Canadian literature on that. And one of the things that I did in 2014 was a review of reward and recognition for teaching excellence at the University of Glasgow that I was working at the time, and so that had a lot to do with scholarship and had a lot to do with SoTL as well. And so one of the things that we try to do in this PG Cert is that we try to be transparent when we are teaching on the course, and that comes from the TILT project, so the Transparency in Teaching and Learning project run by Marianne Winklemis, and that is about explicitly teaching parts of education theory, originally for undergraduates. So I would have taught Bloom's cognitive taxonomy to undergraduate students, and then got them to actually implement that and apply it to exam questions, and also got them to share their reflective writing. So all of that we brought into the PG Cert for development, so that our students who are members of staff share their blogs with one another, they write blogs, they read each other's, they comment on them, and we also expose them to specific parts of educational theory that they can then put into practice and with their own students. So in this PG Cert, we have these principles that we are clear and explicit about the theory and the literature. We relate everything that we do to the participants' practice, so they bring their practice to our live sessions, and that's what we discuss. They have the opportunity to carry out an inquiry in the final part of the course, so the last course is an inquiry, and then we're also cognizant of these threshold concepts in SoTL. So where is it that SoTL practitioners get stuck? And that happens in all areas of SoTL. So this is quite a new piece of research, so it's about 5-6 years old at the moment. So some of the challenges that we face, for example, are expert as novice. So it can be quite disconcerting for people who have spent a long time, probably in excess of 10 years, becoming an expert in their discipline, to then be plunged into the world of pedagogic research and the scholarship of teaching and learning and not really know all that much about it. So that transition from expert to novice, or that dual identity, can be quite difficult for some academics. And so we support our students through that. The language of SoTL can be different, and the vocabulary can be quite different. It draws from social sciences, so it can be a challenge for people from sciences or from engineering to understand what we're doing. Also reflection and reflective writing, it can be the first time that people have actually engaged in reflective writing. They're probably much more comfortable doing more descriptive or analytical writing, so reflection comes as a bit of a surprise to them. The conception of learning can be a challenge for people to understand that it's what the student does that's important when the student is learning, and that we're there to guide the student rather than to prove that we're the expert. Again, theory and practice can be difficult for our students on the PG Cert to come to grips with, because they're not familiar with educational theory, although they are familiar with teaching practice, and so we try to put those two things together and get them to make the links between the theory and their practice. Also believing the paradigm, believing that there is rigour in the educational research that they're reading, the practice that they're reading, and also when they actually come to do their inquiry, that the methods and methodologies that we employ may be quite alien to them, or even how to analyse the data. For example, if you are a scientist or an engineer, you might not know how to approach interview data, for example, to do a thematic analysis. So all of these things are challenges in the PG Cert. So embedding SoTL for us means quite a complex set of arrangements which we infuse throughout the entire programme. So first of all, our PG Cert addresses the 4 dimensions of SoTL. So that comes from Keith Trigwell's work, and the 4 dimensions of SoTL are that the students should be informed by the literature, the students should communicate their findings, so they discuss and they disseminate, that the students should be reflective practitioners, and that the students should develop a learner-centred conception of teaching. So the reflective practice is explicitly taught, so we use either Driscoll or Gibbs's model of reflection. It's embedded in different ways in each course. We are transparent about the theory that we use, and we relate that to the practice of the students. We also have a requirement for teaching observations, so we have peer teaching observations and mentor observations, some of which are formative and some of which are summative throughout the programme. We encourage the students to have critically reflective writing. We sustain that throughout the programme in different ways. We attach it to literature and we attach it to theory, and then of course we have our scholarly inquiry as our capstone project. So really the courses at the beginning of the programme are all leading to the inquiry at the end of the programme.
So let me share a little more about our PG Cert. When we decided to create this new programme, we started by reviewing the existing programme and other CPD available. We consulted with previous students and also with colleagues in the schools across the university to identify what learning and teaching knowledge and skills participants really need. We also consulted more widely within the HE sector to identify and draw from practice in other institutions. Of particular interest to us was any others operating in global universities such as we were doing. However, a few of our responses covered that. But the data helped us inform the design of the programme alongside the scholarly approach which Anne has already mentioned. So the PG Cert sits within a wider programme of learning and teaching support. For those brand new to teaching, we provide a 2 half-day workshop called Getting Started with Teaching at Heriot-Watt, and that's very practically focused on what do you need to be able to do to start teaching. Alongside that, and indeed sitting alongside the PG Cert, we host a New to Teaching network, a community of practice open to anyone in their first 3 years of teaching. That meets monthly and has guest speakers from across the university on topics of relevance to those in the early stages of their teaching career, but also provides a safe space to discuss any issues and questions that are coming up for them. And then at the other end, after the PG Cert, we have a range of CPD on offer, including support for Senior and Principal Fellowship of the Higher Education Academy. But now let me explain the programme itself. So it's a 2-year programme, part-time, comprising, as you can see on the slide, of 4 by 15 credit courses. Each course is a nominal 150 hours and takes place across 1 semester. The time is split as 50 hours of directed study, 50 hours of self-directed study, and then 50 hours of teaching practice. So the directed study includes participation in webinars, discussion boards and other activities such as a reflective journal and an annotated bibliography. Participants can obviously use the self-directed study as they choose. And then that final 50 hours of teaching practice is where they put this into practice in their day-to-day teaching. So it's very much an authentic approach. The programme is taught wholly online and was always designed that way even before the pandemic. And it's focused on active learning. We designed it this way so that participants could join from any of our campuses in Malaysia, Dubai, Edinburgh, Borders or Orkney. And that global cohort really provides a richness and diversity to the programme, which has benefited participants and the programme. But it also provides participants the opportunity to really develop connections across the university and to adopt authentic global working practices which benefit them in their daily work across 3 time zones and 5 campuses. The programme is constructively aligned so that each course builds towards that capstone inquiry in the final course that you've already heard about. Participants start the programme with Learning About Learning, an introduction to the core aspects of teaching and learning, including SoTL, and that provides a foundation for the rest of the programme. For some participants, that's all they require for their role, and if that's the case, they can exit the programme at this point with 15 credits and also the award of Associate Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, indicating that they've met Descriptor 1 of the UK PSF, which Anne mentioned earlier. Those continuing into the full programme though, they progress into Course 2, which is Reframing, Feedback and Assessment. So there what they explore is some of the traditional assessment and feedback practices as well as thinking about the more innovative practices. And again, this is very much authentic based, supporting them to design their own assessments. In Year 2, participants undertake Course 3, which is Exploring Learning Spaces. Here they consider physical learning spaces such as teaching on campus, in the workplace, in fieldwork, and also online learning spaces such as the VLE or LMS, webinar platforms and virtual worlds. They also explore key concepts such as community and belonging and informal and formal learning. And then the final course, as Anne mentioned, is that capstone inquiry. Alongside conducting their own scholarly inquiry into an aspect of teaching and learning that interests them, participants draw on learning from the rest of the programme and continue to develop their understanding of scholarship of teaching and learning in much more depth. Successful completion of the programme leads to award of the Postgraduate Certificate in Teaching and Learning, SoTL, and also Fellowship of the Higher Education Academy, indicating that they've met Descriptor 2 of the UK PSF. Now, underpinning the whole programme are 4 themes and 7 principles. The themes are topics which we felt were so important to participants that they could not be covered in just one unit or even in one course, but that they should be woven throughout the programme. And as you can see on the slide here, the themes are digital education, equity, global practice, and of course scholarship. Now, the principles of the programme are the points which have guided us as a programme team in the design and indeed the delivery of the programme. Firstly, it needs to be authentic. As far as possible, the practices which we ask participants to undertake are things they are already doing in their role or that they will be doing in the future. So this is not theoretical study, but authentic practice of teaching and learning. Secondly, we focus on quality and enhancement. This reflects the environment in which we operate, which Anne mentioned earlier. So higher education in Scotland is very much focused on an enhancement model, and that informs our whole university. We really focused on teaching practice and provide that opportunity for project work to support participants to enhance that practice further. That really provides a safe space to explore new practices, and that's really important for our participants. The programme is not just informed by SoTL, but is also focused on scholarship for our participants, so encouraging them not just to draw from the scholarly literature, but to think about how they share their own practice, and indeed we share our practice at the same time. We'll see a bit more about scholarship later on. Now, as far as possible, we've designed the programme to be flexible, recognising that participants are also working staff with commitments both inside and outside the university. Once participants have completed course 1, they can then complete the other courses in any order, so giving them some flexibility there, and also giving them space to take a break if they need it. Likewise, we intentionally designed the programme so that participants who are working at Descriptor 1 of the UK PSF, so for example tutors, markers, demonstrators or PhD students who are assisting with teaching, could complete course 1 and then exit with an award, but could then come back and pick up the programme again in the future if they started working at Descriptor 2, so for example as an assistant professor. And that replaced the previous system, which would have required them to duplicate their studies, which clearly wasn't very fair. Now, we've taken a universal design approach to the programme, trying to ensure that it's accessible for all. We're also committed to diversifying and decolonising the literature on which the programme is based, and ensuring that the diversity of our participants, and indeed their students, is reflected in our case studies and examples. We see that as a really important part of modelling equitable teaching practice from which the participants can learn. And then finally, underpinning all of these other principles is our commitment to transparency. We explain to participants the pedagogy which underpins each aspect of the programme, the choices that we've made about the activities they're invited to participate in, and why we've made those choices. Where we use a particular tool or approach, we explain why it's been chosen and also how to use it, so that if participants want to try it themselves, they can do so. That's particularly useful where we've used something in an innovative way. And all materials, resources and activities are also available for participants to use in their own teaching as well. Now that you've heard about our programme, we're really interested to hear about yours. So we've used Driscoll's 1994 model of reflection to scaffold this part of the workshop. We'd like to invite you to start by considering the what. So if you're designing or delivering a PG Cert, PG Cap or similar programme, what do you do to embed SoTL in your programme? What do you do to ensure that your programme is sustainable? And you might also like to consider whether anything from our programme has resonated for you. If you're a participant on such a programme, pause and think about what the concept of SoTL means to you. You might like to reflect on what you knew about it before you started your studies and what you know now. And think about how SoTL is relevant for you in your work. If you're involved in the strategy and policy around learning and teaching in your institution, then we'd invite you to consider what you do to provide links from any PG Cap, PG Cert programme to the rest of the university. And also to think about how you support and embed SoTL across your university community. Now, if you're listening to the recording, I'd suggest that you pause now and consider the questions that are relevant to you, and then move on when you're ready. Thinking about Driscoll's next question, so what? In terms of our PG Cert so far, there have been some benefits and some challenges. So as Sean noticed, we are seeing our participants developing as reflective practitioners. Indeed, the depth and quality of reflection has been commented on by both our moderator and our external examiner. Likewise, as Antman and Olsen noted, we are seeing participants developing an increasing understanding of relevant literature and their use of it to inform their practice. Indeed, by the time they get to courses 3 and 4, they're really quite explicit about their pedagogic approach and their use of scholarly literature to inform their teaching. And the annotated bibliographies that they develop in courses 2 and 3 are providing them with a useful resource to support that. We're also seeing them move from sharing their practice with others on the programme to sharing more widely within their disciplines and schools, to even participating in university-wide sharing practice sessions and presenting at Learning and Teaching Week or in the wider sector. So as Trigwell et al. Noted, they're really developing their confidence to share their practice both with their peers internally and externally, and that's really exciting. But as I mentioned, there are some challenges too. So first of all, for some participants, moving from description to reflection, as Moon noted, is a real challenge. So we've instigated the use of reflective journals across the programme and give feedback to participants about those so that we can help them to support and develop their understanding of reflection and reflective writing. But that does take time. Likewise, it takes time for participants to develop their understanding of the norms of SoTL practice, and that's something that we expected, which is why we've built support for this into the whole programme. Now, we recognise that diversifying the literature is important and we continue to do that, but we know that there'll always be more we can do in this area, and we would very much welcome suggestions from colleagues across the globe. Finally, as Webb and Tierney note in previous years, getting buy-in and understanding across the university is important. Now, whilst we've got buy-in across the university at senior level, particularly based on the consultation work that we undertook during the design phase, developing understanding with colleagues, perhaps those who've undertaken previous programmes, is taking a little longer. That's a particular challenge, as sometimes we have to correct misunderstandings about the purpose, rationale or activities on the programme, or mostly about the actual criteria for eligibility of a place on the programme. Now, our entry criteria are aligned with the relevant UK PSF descriptors and it's linked to our professional accreditation. However, that's not always well understood across the university, some of whom see it as just another training workshop, rather than recognising that it is a professionally accredited, taught postgraduate programme. So we continue to work to develop our understanding of the programme across the university.
So if we think about the benefits and challenges for embedding SoTL in a programme such as the PG SoTL, the stakeholders need to be taken into consideration. So first of all, the staff who are designing and delivering a programme need to think about what their benefits and challenges are. The students who are studying need to think about their benefits and challenges, and also People in leadership, so people looking after the strategy and policy, need to think about what are the benefits and challenges of SoTL to enhance teaching and learning in the institution. So if we can look at our own PG Cert at Heriot-Watt, we can see participants are more reflective as they go through the programme. They engage in scholarly literature as they progress. We have currently students going through year 1 and year 2 of the programme, but our markers, our moderator and our external examiner have all noticed that the participants actually are exemplifying reflective writing. They are engaged with the literature, they are making connections between the literature and their progress as they move forward. And that for me is one of the great benefits of doing a programme like this and actually embedding SoTL in the programme right from the beginning. Also, we have the continuation of supporting development and wider engagement across the university. So, for example, the past 18 months, as we all know, have not been easy. But because our students are used to being taught online and used to using the VLE as a vehicle for learning, they actually have stepped up to the mark within their disciplines and within their schools and actually shown by example to their colleagues what is possible. We also have wider engagement across the university via our QAA mini project. So this again is part of our enhancement of teaching and learning at a national level. So we have individuals who have taken up projects which they carry out with their own students. And then we also have a small writing support group in order for people to actually explore the possibilities of producing a scholarly paper out of their project. One of the things that we want to do is evaluate the impact. Again, we're at the very beginning of this programme, and so what we want to do is look at what the impact of the programme is on the individuals who take part in it, but also in the wider sense within their schools and within their campuses.
To finish, we'd like to invite you to think about Driscoll's final question. Now what? If you're designing or delivering a PG Cert, PG CAP or similar, what will you continue to do on your programme and what will you change? If there's anything that we're doing that you think might be helpful to you or you'd like to know more about, then do let us know. If you're a participant on such a programme, what will you do now to develop your understanding or practice of SoTL? For example, you might want to share this presentation with colleagues on the programme or even your programme team, or you might like to explore the references we've used in this presentation, and you'll find a full list of those at the end. If you're involved in strategy and policy around learning and teaching, then think about what you'll do to continue to engage with your teaching programmes and to embed SoTL across your university. Again, feel free to share this presentation or get in touch with us if you'd like to know more about our wider approach to embedding SoTL at Heriot-Watt.
So our takeaway messages really for today, when we think about SoTL as a part of the PG Cert, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we have an institutional understanding of what SoTL is. So it's not just about the students on the PG Cert, it's about the wider institution and how we support that beyond the programme. Within the programme itself is embedding transparency so that we can make these explicit connections between theory and practice so that students can actually see that when they practice their teaching, there is a theoretical grounding for the decisions that they make. Reflection is a very important part of the programme and we thread reflection all the way through. This helps students again to make connections between theory and practice, but also gets them to think about their students and actually gets them to conceptualise teaching around what their students are learning. And then one of the really important things I think is the decision that we took to have a mixed cohort. So we not only have academics on our course, we have PhD students who take part in course 1 and we have professional services staff who can choose to either do course 1 or to do the certificate depending on their level of teaching responsibility that they have. And so I think the mixed cohort is very important because people start to understand what other roles in the university are and people learn from one another's contexts. So that for me is one of the important things.
Now, if you listen to the presentation and would like to share your own experiences, then we'd invite you to do so via the Padlets that are shown on the slide. You can also view other people's comments there. This slide and the next provide you with the references that we've drawn on, both to inform this presentation and also to inform the development of our teaching programme. If this presentation has been of interest and you'd like to know more, then please have a look at our Learning and Teaching Academy website and in the section on teaching, or please feel free to get in touch with myself, Rosemary McKilwin, or indeed my colleague Anne Tierney. We would be very happy to continue these conversations about SoTL informed teaching practice with any colleagues who are interested. Thank you so much for joining us.